Hello, this is Mark Grier, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 9th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, first article. What to know about the Strait of Hormuz under the ceasefire? Vessels are wary of passing the coast of Iran in the strait, given the fragile agreement, and the number of ships traveling through it has even dropped. Hundreds of tankers are waiting to return to the Strait of Hormuz so that the waterway can once again become a conduit for a fifth of the world's oil and gas. But the shaky ceasefire struck between the United States and Iran has not coaxed the tankers back. And even if it holds, other obstacles have to be overcome for shipping traffic to return to normal. Iran has kept a stranglehold on the strait throughout the war by laying mines and attacking vessels. As part of the ceasefire, Iran's foreign minister said the country will allow safe passage for ships through the strait, but he added that the vessels would have to coordinate with Iran's armed forces and that passages would be subject to technical limitations. What is the situation in the strait now? Well, only 5 vessels traveled through the strait on Wednesday, according to Kpler, down from an average of about 10 a day over the previous 5 days. And shipping analysts said there were no signs of large-scale positioning or quarrying to go through the strait. The fragility of the ceasefire, Iran said on Wednesday that Israel's attacks on targets in Lebanon had violated the agreement, was the main reason that ships were holding back, shipping industry participants had said. It's too unstable for anyone to commit, said Oscar Sikalai, chief executive for NSI Insurance Group, a maritime insurance brokerage. What has to happen first for ships to go back? Well, first, shipping analysts say there has to be confidence that the ceasefire will hold. And then there has to be a declaration from Iran that it will not attack vessels. Iran must clarify that the strait is open for safe passage. Otherwise, vessels should not be expected to sail through the way they were prior to the war, said Noam Raydan, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. But Iran is also demanding that it oversee and coordinate passages through the strait. The government hasn't clearly stated what vessel operators must do to gain permission to pass through. Some ship owners have made toll payments to Iran, and according to Kpler, a shipping tracking firm, most of the crossing during the war have taken a route that goes close to Iran's coast. This suggests that Iran requires taking this route. Iran's official broadcaster said on Wednesday that because of anti-ship mines in the traffic zones, vessels must coordinate with the Iranian Navy and use designated routes to cross the waterway. Do governments have to get involved? Well, the governments of India, Pakistan, and Thailand have worked with Iran to ensure safe passage of vehicles. In a joint statement on Wednesday, the leaders of 7 European nations, Canada, the European Commission, and the European Council, said their governments will contribute to ensuring freedom of navigation in the strait. President Trump suggested on Wednesday that the United States might jointly control the strait with Iran. The United States of America will be helping with the traffic buildup in the Strait of Hormuz, Mr. Trump said in a social media post. There will be lots of positive action. Big money will be made. ABC News reported on Wednesday that Mr. Trump had told one of its reporters that the United States could operate shipping in the strait as a joint venture with Iran. Will shipping return if Iran doesn't give up full control? Well, analysts say Iran can continue to act as a gatekeeper if a number of vessels going through the strait remains relatively small, but it would not be able to manage the more than 100 ships a day that passed through the strait before the war. Blanket passage arrangements are unlikely to be implementable by Iran due to capacity constraints around vessel identification and ongoing requirements to guide vessels through the corridor. Jack Kennedy, head of Middle East and North America country risk at S&P Global Market Intelligence, had said in an email. Also, the threat of war will linger if Iran keeps throttling the strait. The Persian Gulf states do not want Iran to have such power over the waterway. Oman, the country on the other side of the strait, could invite ships to pass close to its coastline, but such a move might prompt Iran to attack the vessels. Will shipping companies pay a toll to Iran? Well, given that more than 100 large commercial ships have gone through the strait since the war began, some vessel operators are willing to negotiate with Iran and even pay millions of dollars for a passage. Shipping companies are losing money on vessels that are waiting to go through the strait, so they may be willing to pay large sums to get their ships out into the Indian Ocean and operating normally. Still, the larger, more established shipping companies may decide that doing business with Iran is too much of a legal risk, particularly if the United States continues to impose sanctions on Iran. The issue of sanctions on Iran makes it a very complicated process, since it involves financial transactions with a sanctioned regime, Ms. Radan had said. How hard is it to get insurance? Well, when the fighting began, the cost of war risk insurance for ships and cargo going through the strait skyrocketed. A few shipping companies bought in, and it has been available at times during the war. Mr. Sikle, the insurance executive, said, but the fragility of the ceasefire has driven down demand for insurance. It is not the right moment, and everyone knows that, he said. Okay, next article. A ceasefire for now in Iran, but a blow to American credibility. Critics wonder if this is America's Suez moment, when a leading power signals the start of its international decline. Historical analogies are never exact, but with the tenuous ceasefire deal in the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, some are asking whether this is a Suez moment for the United States, marking the waning of American power and credibility in the world. The Suez Crisis took place in October 1956, when Britain, France, and Israel attacked Egypt to force open the Suez Canal. President Dwight Eisenhower, with an election days away, ordered them to stop. Prime Minister Anthony Eden of Britain resigned. President Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt became a hero of anti-colonialism. Suez became shorthand for the moment that Britain, exhausted from World War II, gave way as a global power to the United States. There are differences from that time. The Suez Canal is man-made and wholly in Egyptian territory, unlike the international waterway of the Strait of Hormuz. There's no other global power capable of replacing America in the region, let alone ordering President Trump around. But the 2-week ceasefire leaves the Islamic Republic in place and still in command of the future of the Strait of Hormuz, with Iran's nuclear stockpile and ballistic missile program unresolved. After Mr. Trump's declaration of victory, however hollow, it is difficult to imagine a resumption of full-scale war. For the rest of the world, the war is starting to look like a military defeat more serious than Iraq or Afghanistan, said Bruno Macas, former Secretary of State for European Affairs for Portugal. The myth of America as all-powerful is important, he added, and it's the basic requirement of a global hegemon that to keep the oil flowing, to open up the strait and keep it open. This belief in an all-powerful America that can solve anything is disappearing. Keeping sea lanes open for American goods and global trade is one of the few permanent interests the United States has in the Middle East, as well as in Asia. The war in Iran shut down the strait. Now, the Iranian military is still in control of the passageway and is likely to demand large tolls. The strategic rationale for the American military presence in the region has taken a huge hit, said Stephen Wertheim, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment in Washington. The Suez analogy works, Mr. Wertheim said, and that the war in Iran demonstrated in a single incident the danger of American misgovernance and poor judgment. The war itself and its uncertain outcome, he said, just accelerates the existing worry shared by countries around the world about what America's declining quality of governance means for what they can expect from the United States. America's allies may be unhappy, perplexed, and even angry about Trump administration policies, but many of them, especially those in the Persian Gulf and Asia, suffering the impact of energy shortages and restrictions, have few other options for security partners. But the war and ceasefire deal have diminished American influence and will affect how the allies of the United States view its reliability, said Charles Kupchan, a political scientist and director of European Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. The war against Iran was not begun in consultation with allies, and it came after a series of events that have confounded them. Mr. Trump's tariff wars were an unpleasant shock, but his threat to take Greenland by force, if necessary, from Denmark, a European and NATO ally, is seen as an inflection point about American predation and unreliability and contempt for traditional friends. The Iran war and its economic impact are piling on and reinforce this sense that the U.S. right now has become unpredictable and undependable. International relations and alliances work on trust, but as Francis Fukuyama of Stanford University wrote on Tuesday, there has never been a time when the United States was more distrusted by both traditional friends and by rivals as at the present. A successful dealmaker, he said, needs to generate a minimal amount of trust that he will uphold his end of the bargain. But reciprocity is a virtue that Trump has never understood or practiced, he said. The war has challenged Washington's argument that its global primacy was vital to the safety of international trade and the world order. This has been the main justification for the many American bases around the world, and especially in the Middle East. But the war has shown the United States instead acting as a force of disorder and disruption. By engaging in a war of choice in a critical region for global trade and utterly ignoring the probable consequences for the economies of its closest allies, the Trump administration has destroyed the legitimacy of American power, asserted Anatoly Levin of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. The impact of a diminished United States is strongest in Europe, which has relied on NATO and the American security guarantee implicit in membership, including the U.S. nuclear umbrella. But Europeans drew a distinction between faith in America and faith in Mr. Trump. The former remains because it is vital for European security. Still, Mr. Trump's policies are inevitably producing a response that will outlast him. The rest of the world is trying to organize itself and de-risk from an America that treats its allies as enemies and its traditional enemies like Russia and China as friends. Asked if American hegemony has been diminished, the foreign minister of Poland said, "We hope not, but we fear it might be." NATO has taken a hit from Mr. Trump's overall policies. He continually calls it a paper tiger, despite successfully pushing its members to spend considerably more money on the military. During the war in Iran, he lashed out at the Europeans for not acting to open the strait, even though the more powerful U.S. Navy was unable to do so. Allied resistance to his desires rankles him the most. It all began with, "You want to know the truth? Greenland." Mr. Trump told reporters on Monday, "They don't want to give it to us," and I said, "Bye-bye." The cumulative impact on NATO is significant, said Rajan Menon, professor emeritus of political science at City University in New York. In the long run, China looks to be the bigger winner. While we look crazed and talk about bombing a country back to the Stone Age, China looks like a peacemaker and agent of stability, he said. All the while, Beijing got a chance to watch how the U.S. Navy operates. China is looking on with a great deal of glee, and when Trump goes there for the summit meeting, now scheduled for mid-May, he will be much diminished. China, which gets so much of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz, pushed Iran to agree to the ceasefire, and it is expected to participate in keeping the strait open and guaranteeing safe passage for others. Much depends on how the war ends, cautioned Mr. Kupchan of the Council of Foreign Relations. If the ceasefire leads to a deal that imposes significant constraints on Iran's nuclear program and its ability to cause trouble, he said, that would be much better in the long run than a frozen conflict or one that just burns on month after month, with all the accompanying impact on the energy market and American allies. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. U.S. forces stand ready to resume combat. The president may not be as enthused. President Trump knows that even if a ceasefire runs out with no final agreement on the issue dividing Washington and Tehran, the political risk of renewing hostilities is high. At the Pentagon on Wednesday morning, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared that the Iranians had been humiliated and demoralized over the past 5 weeks, and that the United States would get a hold of the country's nuclear stockpiles by persuasion or by force. The more soft-spoken chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, told reporters that U.S. forces would remain in the Middle East and were ready if ordered or called upon to resume combat operations with the same speed and precision as we've demonstrated over the last 38 days. But just a few hours into the fragile ceasefire that President Trump announced on Tuesday, it was clear that while resuming combat operations may be a viable military option if negotiations go nowhere, it is not a particularly viable political choice for Mr. Trump. And with talks scheduled to start in Islamabad on Friday, the Iranians know it. If shipments actually resume through the Strait of Hormuz, the price of Brent crude oil, which has already dropped about 14%, hovering around $95 a barrel, could keep falling. Gas prices should follow, even if no one is expecting them to go back to where they were before the war broke out. Major stock indexes rose over 2%. These are the measures of instant success that register with Mr. Trump. And he knows that even if the 2-week ceasefire runs out on April 21st with no final agreement on the long list of issues that have divided Washington and Tehran for decades, the political risk of renewing hostilities is high, particularly with the midterm elections looming and an upcoming summit with the Chinese leader. The feature of these negotiations that may extend the ceasefire is that there is a bit of mutually assured destruction between the U.S. and Iran right now, said Suzanne Maloney, an Iran expert and the vice president of the foreign policy program at the Brookings Institution. She added, the U.S. can resume military operation at any moment, but the Iranians have shown they can turn around and threaten attacks on the Strait of Hormuz, with all the predictable effects on the price of oil and fertilizer. And these are the levers that the president is acutely aware of. Most of the big mistakes Trump made in what he called his excursion into Iran, he made at the beginning of the operation. He did not consult his closest allies ahead of the February 28th attacks, and then was shocked to discover that they were uninterested in backing him up. Some of the goals he articulated at the beginning of the conflict, including encouraging the Iranian people to rise up against the clerics and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, were soon dropped. The Gulf states had no warning and found their most valuable assets, from oil rigs to desalination plants, essentially undefended when the Iranian missiles began to fly. Congress was cut out, the mega base was fractured, and even some Iran hawks on Capitol Hill chafed at the $1 billion a day price tag and the fact that no administration officials came to testify about the war or the administration's goals. That damage is now done, and all of it will weigh on Mr. Trump if he threatens to resume combat operations. Mr. Hegseth pointed to what could well turn out to be the test of Mr. Trump's willingness to go back into Iran. Briefing reporters at the Pentagon on Wednesday, he said that one outcome of the negotiations must include an agreement by Iran to give up the 970 pounds of near bomb-grade uranium the country has been storing deep underground, mostly at its Isfahan nuclear site. They will either give it to us, Mr. Hegseth said, of the enriched material or will take it out. Such a mission would, at a minimum, involve hundreds of U.S. Special Operations troops and would come with the risk of high casualties, current and former commanders say. When asked exactly how the enriched uranium would be removed, Mr. Hegseth said, "That's something the President is going to solve." Okay, next article. European leaders demand that U.S. ceasefire with Iran include Lebanon. Britain, France, and the European Union condemned Israel's strikes targeting Hezbollah in the country, saying these threatened the truce. European leaders demanded for Lebanon to be included in the U.S.-Iran ceasefire deal, intensifying their calls on Thursday after Israel launched a wave of attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon that killed more than 200 people. Iran says Israel's attacks on Wednesday violated the ceasefire deal, and Iran's Revolutionary Guards threatened a military response if attacks on Lebanon were not immediately halted, in a statement carried by Iranian state media. Israel and the United States have said that the agreement does not include Lebanon. These Israeli attacks were the deadliest since the escalation of the country's conflict with Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed militia in Lebanon, after the United States and Israel attacked Iran in late February. Lebanese health officials say that more than 1,700 people have been killed there since the conflict started. The Europeans ratcheted up their public comments as American and Iranian officials prepared to meet for face-to-face talks on Saturday in Pakistan, which brokered the ceasefire deal. Now, for Britain, Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, criticized Israel's attack on Lebanon, calling them a deeply damaging escalation. She said that she wanted to see Lebanon included in the ceasefire because failure to do so would destabilize the whole region. Ms. Cooper made the comments as Prime Minister Keir Starmer was in the Middle East meeting with representatives of Persian Gulf allies, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Now from France, Jean-Noel Barrot, the foreign minister, condemned Israel's escalating strikes on Lebanon, arguing that they undermined a tenuous ceasefire. Mr. Barrot told France Inter Radio that Iran must stop terrorizing Israel through Hezbollah, but added Lebanon should not be the scapegoat of an Israeli government that is frustrated because a ceasefire has been reached between the United States and Iran. Now from the European Union, Kaja Kallas, the top EU diplomat, condemned the Israeli attacks on Lebanon, saying Hezbollah dragged Lebanon into the war. But Israel's right to defend itself does not justify inflicting such massive destruction. She said the strikes had put the ceasefire under severe strain, and that the truce should include Lebanon. Israeli strikes killed hundreds last night, making it hard to argue that such heavy-handed actions fall within self-defense, she said. And from Spain, José Manuel Albares, the foreign minister, condemned the Israeli strikes on Lebanon, calling them a shame to humanity's conscience. He also said Spain would reopen its embassy in Iran, which has been closed for a month. Spain has been one of the most persistent and vocal critics of the United States and Israel over the attack on Iran. Okay, next article. Once ultra mega, Trump supporters fume about Iran on Truth Social. A growing chorus of disaffected Trump supporters is sounding off in the replies to his post on the social media platform that he founded. The people logging into Truth Social each day tend to count themselves among the most ardent supporters of President Trump and his MAGA movement. In recent weeks, though, even some in the echo chamber have turned against his actions in Iran. Thousands of users on the social media platform, which Mr. Trump created in 2022, have responded to the president's drumbeat of posts with a mix of frustration, disbelief, and outrage. They have written that they feel betrayed by the expanding war in Iran and ashamed when Mr. Trump used an expletive on Easter to make demands of the Iranian government. Some were so perplexed by his military interventions that one declared they make zero sense. The responses on Truth Social, numbering in the tens of thousands, over a snapshot of a simmering criticism from the right that has intensified in recent weeks over Mr. Trump's decision to go to war in Iran. While polling suggests that Republicans still broadly support the war, unease and anger are bubbling up on Mr. Trump's own platform. Mr. Trump's approach to the war, which has disrupted oil shipments from the Persian Gulf and driven up gas prices, has clearly rattled parts of his base. Many voters were drawn to Mr. Trump in part because he had been deeply critical of global entanglements, and some supporters even spoke of him as the peace president. Truth Social's user base is relatively minuscule, with an estimated 6 million users compared to more than 550 million on X, which is owned by Elon Musk. It has never attracted enough advertisers to turn a profit, but it has served as Mr. Trump's megaphone, even after he returned to the White House for a second term. It is also one of the places where Mr. Trump's most devoted supporters can interact with him, at least virtually, providing a glimpse of views of his political base. An analysis by the New York Times of more than 40,000 comments on Mr. Trump's post showed the depths of discontent over the war. More than half of those responding to Mr. Trump warned on Tuesday morning that Iran's whole civilization will die were deeply critical of his comments. One user, who indicated on their profile page that they supported President Trump 100%, wrote that Mr. Trump had demonstrated a lust for blood. A Trump-loving conservative wrote that such threats would destroy the president's legacy. I'm honestly heartbroken, the user added. While social media sites tend to have a large number of bot accounts, the Times highlighted only examples showing no obvious signs of bot activity. Only a quarter of the comments were supportive, including posts praising Mr. Trump's backbone and asking him to finish the job. The analysis used AI tools to analyze the sentiment of the posts, assigning them a ratio from very critical to very supportive. The fact that the war has left Iran's government in power, its nuclear stockpile in place, and its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz intact has frustrated some of who supported the war. When Mr. Trump backed off his threats to attack Iran's infrastructure hours ahead of Tuesday night's deadline, he said, some of the accounts that had been supportive of the war expressed outrage. The roiling sentiment reflects the challenging conditions facing the president and the Republican Party ahead of this year's midterm elections. Mr. Trump recently recorded the worst approval rating yet during his second term. Mr. Trump drew strong rebukes for his expletive-filled post on Easter Sunday, which threatened to destroy the country's power plants and bridges, and was punctuated with a mocking praise to Allah. Hundreds of critical responses followed. Even if it was a joke, you're actually so immature, it's sad, and I voted for you twice, and stick up for you all day long on Facebook, wrote one account with the username Trump Will Save Us 2024. Mr. Trump's announcement that he had reached a deal on a 2-week ceasefire did little to assuage critics, the analysis showed. Thousands of comments criticized Mr. Trump for backing down on his threat while receiving little in return. While the president's deeply loyal base has shown a willingness to overlook points of disagreement, cracks have shown more frequently during his second term. He previously faced criticism from the right over the handling of the files related to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender. Many were upset after Mr. Trump dismissed the push to release documents as a Democratic hoax. On Truth Social, the criticism over the Epstein files was more muted than the criticism over Iran. The Times analysis showed a post in which Mr. Trump called it a Jeffrey Epstein hoax divided commenters. About a third were critical, a third expressed support, and a third appeared neutral. After his post on Easter, a user called Magnum Force 44 addressed him respectfully but with disappointment. Quote, "While I have been a staunch supporter of you and voted for you all 3 times," the user wrote, "I take exception to the vulgar language and the potential damage to the innocent Iranians who are asking for regime change." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. Clean energy slate wins control over Arizona's biggest utility. Proponents of renewable power will control the Phoenix area utilities policymaking for the first time after they won an unusually contentious race that drew attention from national groups. A slate of liberal candidates won control of the board of Arizona's largest public utility this week, according to preliminary results posted on Wednesday, emerging from a surprisingly contentious race that attracted national attention. The winning candidates, who campaigned as the Clean Energy Team, drew support from the Sierra Club and the actress Jane Fonda as they ran against a rival slate backed by state business leaders and Turning Point USA, the conservative group Charlie Kirk founded. The utility, the Salt River Project, delivers power and water to millions of customers across metropolitan Phoenix, and its board determines how much households will pay for those precious services in one of America's hottest and driest cities. 2 of the Turning Point endorsed candidates also prevailed, winning their races for board president and vice president, who act as conduits between the elected officials and the utility's management. Still, members of the Power District Board, aligned with the Clean Energy Team, will now hold an 8-6 majority, meaning proponents of renewable power will control the utility's policymaking for the first time. Starting when we're sworn in, SRP will be the largest utility in the country with a majority vote of clean energy supporters, said Ken Clark, who is one of the team's newly elected candidates and will represent a swath of north central Phoenix. There has been a pent-up demand, especially in Arizona, for people to have their energy freedom, to have solar panels, batteries, and more energy-efficient measures. The Salt River Project's elections, open only to property owners, have always been low turnout affairs, held separately from other state and local races. This year's was different, thanks largely to Turning Point's funding and organizing, but the results suggest the group's strategy may have backfired. Liberal organizations used Turning Point's involvement to raise awareness about the contest and urge participation from new voters. "I oppose everything they stand for," said Bill Callan, a 55-year-old Tempe resident, referring to Turning Point. He has been eligible to vote for 3 decades but did not cast his first utility ballot until Tuesday, saying it's never mattered more. The clean energy candidates support a faster transition to renewable resources, incentives for installing of solar panels, and higher rates for data center developments. Their opponents represented the utility board's traditional leadership, which has been wary of solar and other renewable technologies and has argued that abandoning fossil fuels would raise prices and lead to blackouts. The newly elected board president, Chris Dobson, and vice president Barry Paisley have spent years in utility leadership and have advocated a mix of energy sources, including natural gas. They have said that they are not ideologues. And Mr. Paisley said before the election that outside groups like Turning Point were not involved in their campaigns. In a statement on Wednesday, Mr. Paisley said that Salt River Project has been the most successful utility in Arizona. "Our first focus will always be to provide the most affordable rates with the highest reliability and striving for the most economic and sustainable methods of power generation for today and well into the future," he said. In a statement, a Turning Point spokesman, Andrew Colvett, celebrated Mr. Dobson and Mr. Paisley's wins and said they would blunt the effect of radical California-style energy and water policies. Mr. Colvett attributed their success in part to Turning Point's work, knocking on doors and chasing ballots in some of the bluest parts of Maricopa County. The election is officially nonpartisan, but the surge in spending from interest groups injected the race with a sort of political rancor more commonly found in Arizona's statewide elections. For the first time in residents' memory, utility election flyers appeared in their mailboxes by the bundle, and campaign signs sprouted at seemingly every intersection, even brimming with accusations about a candidate's political donors or purported rate-hiking ambitions. Mr. Clark, with the clean energy team, lamented the boiling down of people to these two-dimensional beings and said he and his allies would be able to find common ground with the other 6 board members. Excuse me. One priority for the new majority, he said, would be to examine the utility's arcane voting system. The Salt River Project still uses election rules that date to 1903, nearly a decade before Arizona became a U.S. state. Only property holders are allowed to cast ballots in the utility's election, and the more land they own, the more votes they get. The clean energy side argued that the system favored the business-backed establishment candidates, who tend to attract the support of larger landowners. But when first-time voters like Armella Gaines, a Glendale resident, heard about the election and her right to cast a ballot, she was more motivated to participate, to counter what she saw as an unfair system. Ms. Gaines, who supported the clean energy team, was one of more than 35,000 who voted, more than quadruple the typical turnout. When I got the flyers, she said, referring to mailed campaign literature, I thought, oh, something different is happening this year. All right, next article. No charges for Wisconsin mayor who removed ballot drop box in 2024. A special prosecutor said a review of the incident found there was no sufficient evidence to charge Doug Dinny, the mayor of Wausau. A Wisconsin mayor who removed an empty, locked ballot box and took it into his office in September of 2024 will not be charged with a crime, a special prosecutor said on Wednesday. The removal of the drop box by Mayor Doug Dinny of Wausau, Wisconsin, a Republican, had stoked fears about drop box security before a contentious presidential election. Mr. Dinny said at the time that he did not believe the box, which was still being set up and had not yet been bolted to the ground, would be secure. He also said that he disagreed with the city's clerk about who had the authority to decide whether to install the box, which contained no ballots at the time of its removal. The special prosecutor, Eric Toney, who is the district attorney of Fond du Lac County and is running for state attorney general, said Wednesday that his review had found that there was no sufficient evidence to prove a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. In a 7-page memo, his office cited the lack of ballots in the box and said the box did not fit the legal definition of a ballot box under Wisconsin state law. The review was signed by Mr. Toney, a Republican, Joan Korb, a Democrat and a local prosecutor, and Kennedy Cutts, another local prosecutor. There are some that wanted charges issued based on politics and others that did not want charges issued based on politics, Mr. Toney said in a statement. However, the facts are the facts, and the law is the law. In an interview on Wednesday evening, Mr. Dinny acknowledged that the episode had been, to some level, a national embarrassment for Wausau, a city of about 40,000 people in central Wisconsin, a swing state. The mayor, who has 2 years left on his term, said that he was pleased by the special prosecutor's finding and that it was time for the city to move on with city business. In October, the 5-member Wausau Ethics Board unanimously found that Mr. Dinny had violated the city's ethics code by exceeding his authority in removing the box. A spokesman for the Wisconsin Democratic Party, Philip Schulman, argued on Wednesday that Mr. Dinny had gotten a free pass on a technicality and said that the mayor had been trying to sow doubts about the election's integrity. In 2024, Mr. Dinny said that the box's installation did not conform with security guidelines from the Wisconsin Election Commission. He argued that the city council should have been consulted on the box's installation. The city clerk, Caitlin Bernard, said the box did not comply with the guidelines because it had not yet been fully installed. Her office had intended to bolt it to the ground before opening it for use. It was not ready for use when Mr. Dinny removed it, she said at the time. Ms. Bernard did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Wednesday. Mr. Dinny ultimately returned the box to the city clerk, and it was used in the 2024 election. Okay, moving on. Next article. Mamdani asserts control over NYPD, saying he would overrule Tisch. Although Mayor Zohran Mamdani often seems to defer to his police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, he insisted that he had the final say in policing matters. Mayor Mamdani sought to affirm his control over the police department on Wednesday, saying he would overrule its commissioner if he felt it necessary. In a wide-ranging interview with the New York Times, the mayor said that he was willing to institute policy changes at the police department if he and the commissioner, Jessica Tisch, could not reach an agreement. Yes, ultimately, I hold the final decision no matter which department or agency we're speaking about, Mr. Mamdani said, speaking from his office at City Hall. He was specifically responding to a question about whether to dismantle a unit known as the Strategic Response Group, which policies protest and other mass events, and has been faulted for using heavy-handed tactics. Ms. Tisch, who is also police commissioner under the former Mayor Eric Adams, has been dubious in the past about getting rid of the entity. I remain steadfast in my commitment to disband the SRG, to do so in a manner that upholds both First Amendment rights of New Yorkers and keeps New Yorkers safe. And that is the subject of an active conversation that we're having, the mayor said during a 22-minute sit-down interview. Mr. Mamdani and Ms. Tisch have had their differences over other issues, including the use of gang databases and the characterization of a snowball fight that left 2 police officers injured. When asked whether he would ultimately overrule Ms. Tisch in potential areas of disagreement, like disbanding the unit, he replied that he would, affirm that he's ultimately responsible for policy policing. Our police commissioner runs the NYPD. Our police commissioner reports to me. And as the mayor, ultimately, I am responsible for what happens in our city within each and every city agency and department, Mr. Mamdani said. He also made a point of praising the commissioner's record, days after they appeared together to herald a drop in crime during his first 3 months as mayor. Mr. Mamdani ran for office promising to fundamentally alter the way the New York Police Department does business. He vowed to eliminate the Strategic Response Group, and he said he would support a city council bid to eliminate the gang database, which compiles the names of people suspected of being gang members. Both entities have attracted the ire of civil libertarians. Since taking office on January 1st, Mr. Mamdani has made no public moves to dismantle either the Strategic Response Group or the gang database. In the case of the SRG, its heavy-handed response to the civil rights protests that swept the nation in 2020 over the killing of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police resulted in a legal settlement with the State Attorney General's office. As a candidate, Mr. Mamdani said the unit cost taxpayers millions in lawsuit settlements, plus brutalized countless New Yorkers. Critics have assailed the gang database for including people with tenuous ties to gangs. Mr. Mamdani, as a candidate, described it as a vast dragnet that makes everyday activities a mark of suspicion. Late last year, the city implemented some reforms to the database, at the urging of the city's Department of Investigation. Ms. Tisch has fiercely defended the program. Yet shortly before winning the November election, Mr. Mamdani stunned some of his supporters when he announced that he would retain Ms. Tisch as police commissioner, a move that appeased some of his critics in the business community. Mr. Mamdani's comments on Wednesday came ahead of his 100th day in office on Friday. Mr. Mamdani came up to the Democratic Socialist movement, which is generally distrustful of the police. Ms. Tisch favors a strong approach to criminal justice. Despite their differences, they had largely presented a united front Before Mr. Mamdani took office, Ms. Tisch acknowledged their differences in an email to rank-and-file officers. Do the mayor-elect and I agree on everything? No, we don't, she wrote in November. But even when the commissioner has openly disagreed with the mayor's stance, she has been careful to not criticize Mr. Mamdani. And on Wednesday, a spokeswoman for the police department said that it was working together with the mayor's office on the SRG issue. She said there was a group of department and city hall officials in Ohio right now studying how the Columbus Police Department responds to a protest. New York mayors typically defer to their police commissioners. Under Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who took office in 2002 after the September 11th terrorist attacks, the police department was notably powerful under its commissioner, Raymond Kelly, throughout Mr. Bloomberg's 12 years in office. Mr. Bloomberg's successor, Bill de Blasio, a left-of-center Democrat like Mamdani, understood that any increase in crime would feed into voters' fears about him. As a result of that, and a memorable dispute with a police union during his first year in office, Mr. de Blasio also largely deferred to his police commissioner. Okay, one more short article. White House knew about Pakistan's ceasefire post on X before it was sent. Pakistan's Prime Minister posted a public plea on X for President Trump to extend his Tuesday event deadline for Iran. The White House was directly involved in shaping the message. It seemed like a last-ditch public plea. President Trump's 8 p.m. deadline for Iran was fast approaching, and Pakistan was trying to orchestrate an off-ramp for both sides. So Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif took to social media. Mr. Sharif, adopting Trumparian parlance, said on a post on X Tuesday afternoon that diplomacy was progressing steadily, strongly, and powerfully, and that he was requesting that Mr. Trump extend the deadline for 2 weeks. He then tagged Mr. Trump and other top advisors. But behind the scenes, the White House had already seen and signed off on the statement before Mr. Sharif posted it, according to a person briefed on the communication, a sign that the diplomatic channels were much more active than the message on social media suggested. And it showed that the White House, even as Mr. Trump was threatening to wipe out Iran's civilization unless Tehran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, was actively looking for a way out of the crisis as the deadline drew near on Tuesday. A White House official denied that Mr. Trump wrote the statement, as some observers speculated on social media when Mr. Sharif initially posted the statement with the header, "Draft Pakistan's PM message on X." The Pakistani embassy did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The pitch worked, at least in the short term. Mr. Trump announced a few hours later that he was agreeing to a 2-week ceasefire with Iran. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 9th issue of the New York Times. Your reader today has been Mark Ryer. Thank you so much for listening.